Okay, let's fortify ourselves. Oh my god. Oh. How's quarantine going for you guys? Good? I realize that I'm taking the bait here because almost everybody and their grandma has made some video dunking on Ben Shapiro and Jordan Peterson and PragerU and some blend of the three. I'll try to put my own individual spin on it. So through this video of Ben Shapiro and Jordan Peterson chatting about intersectionality, you're gonna learn about yourselves. That's right, I'm gonna solve your trauma. These clips are actually recycled from older videos that PragerU has put out on their channel. For some reason, I guess they felt like they were able to get something new out of posting them again. You don't have to know what intersectionality means, we're gonna get to that. Just ride this wave with me until you get your big girl surfboards. So, everything will be linked in the description. Let's go with a clip. Thomas?
I think it speaks to the pathology of the radical left instantly. They're absolutely incapable of viewing the world except through group identity terms. And so if someone comes out and disagrees with them, then they have to characterize them by their fundamental group attribute, whatever that happens to be. Maybe it's gender, because that's a favorite, or maybe it's race. And so angry white men, young, there we go, sexist, ageist, and racist all at once, right?
Let's start with the structure and rhetoric of this video, because that's a very good place to start. So already, we're coloring intersectionality as a totally dysfunctional thing for insane people. Interestingly, all of that comes before we get any descriptive statement on what intersectionality actually is. We're being primed to feel a certain way about this concept so that we're less likely to actually engage with material that accurately represents it. I mean, if you were actually compelled to seek out some intersectional feminist work and understand where they're coming from, the PragerU would have failed in their mission, to quote Dr. Jordan Peterson.
If you can't make your enemy reprehensible along some dimension, then you have to contend with them seriously.
There's also a delightful irony here that Jordan Peterson, I cannot say this man's name. Jordan Peterson is making sweeping generalizations about a vast group of people with very different ideas on things, who he claims are guilty of making sweeping generalizations. The second thing here is that whatever Dr. Peterson identifies as wrong with intersectionality is ascribed to something intrinsically, fundamentally, pathologically wrong about the people who hold those views. Intersectional feminists are faulty to the point of incapacitation, so there's no point even trying to understand them because they're just inherently unreasonable. Trifling fools. This is gonna seem counterintuitive, but you actually make a stronger case for your own position when you present the most charitable, thorough, and strong version of your opponent's arguments. That way, whatever you're trying to say can't just be easily dismissed by someone pointing out that you're being really reductive or you're strawmanning the other person. So here's a question. If intersectional feminists are so batshit, why is it that we haven't gotten any examples yet of specific intersectional feminists and the psycho, crazy, loopy, wookie things they've done? If they're so easy to debunk, pick one and just clench that argument, bro. The older version of this video that was basically just Ben Shapiro's segment but prolonged actually did cite one intersectional feminist. We'll get back to that citation later. So if you're responding to some ideas that are held by a broad and nebulous community, the very least that you can do is pick out some popular and influential voices and respond to something that you disagree with about their ideas. That way you can respond to something that's likely to be a common thread within the arguments and ideas of the wider community. Otherwise, if you don't have to provide evidence, you can say whatever the fuck you want. Like, sure, this video might be true about somebody out there, but because we don't actually know who the fuck inspired a lot of these perceptions about feminists, it's basically just like, that's what feminists are like, yeah. Who are you talking about? Just the general feminist milieu? I've got one. If you have enjoyed the game Rogue Warrior, the 2009 first-person shooter, you don't like actual fun. So I'm accepting continuity errors as part of my brand because I don't give a shit. Here's an apocryphal mistake. They fuck up facts too. This section's gonna be kind of nitpicky. That's okay. They're a university. They can take criticism, right? So in the description of PragerU's video, they describe intersectionality as the newest fad, which doesn't make any sense. I mean, that's not how ideas are born in the first place. Like, remember opposable thumbs? They didn't just pop into existence one day. It took generations of primates over millions of years battling their grandparents in hand-to-hand combat and stealing their thumbs for us to have thumbs and create the world that we know now using our opposable thumbs. That's how evolution works. Intersectionality was a long time coming, and it inherited a lot of tidbits from other feminist traditions across, like, centuries, dudes. My dudes. It was a black feminist named Sojourner Truth who stood up in 1851 in front of, like, a bunch of white women who were claiming to be for women's rights and pointed out that she was a woman too, and a whole lot of white women were really loath to admit that the feminist movement should be advocating for anybody but white women. Even in Simone de Beauvoir's 1949 book, The Second Sex, there's mention of privilege. On page 329, she talks about penis. Plus, the term was coined in 1989. It's like 30-something years old now. 31. These are intersectional flavored ideas, and knowing that intersectionality was stewing for a long time before it was invented as a term, is it fair to say that intersectionality is a fad? Well, no. It's a lot easier to frame these ideas as vacuous if you suggest that they were created by ardently pushy teenagers, like, I don't know, Pop Sockets and Fashion Nova. So, okay, the next thing is that this video starts off with Jordan Peterson saying that intersectionality is a pathology of the radical left, who are incapable of thinking about things outside of group identity terms. Fun fact, not all leftists are intersectional feminists, radical or no. There's a group of people called class reductionists who believe that identity politics actually impede the struggle towards equality and distract from the real issues, which are it's just class, nothing else. It's just, everybody is just the class war. These people usually disparage intersectional feminists for trying to talk about social tensions other than the ones that they've identified as important. Like absolute cool kids, these people have a subreddit. It's called Stupid Poll. YouTube? More like you stupid. This one's a double whammy. In the second portion of the video that features Ben Shapiro, we do get a definition of intersectionality. Again, just keep that in mind. They cite an article that was written by Kimberle Crenshaw, the person who coined the term intersectionality. Now, if I were writing a basic introductory informative video on intersectionality, defining what it is and explaining where the idea came from, I think that Crenshaw's 1989 essay would be the best one to use. It's free to download, so it'd be really easy for your audience to access and verify what you're saying. But more importantly, it's the foundational thing. Most intersectional feminists have either read this essay or learned from somebody who's read this essay. Instead of doing that, the people who wrote this essay decided to choose a little retrospective op-ed that Crenshaw wrote for the Washington Post a couple of years ago. Okay, I mean, you're in the right ballpark. Except they do something kind of weird with the quote here. Ben speaks really emphatically when Crenshaw writes in the first person.
The term intersectionality was coined by Kimberle Crenshaw, a professor of law at Columbia University. She explains that intersectionality was my attempt to make feminism, anti-racist activism, and anti-discrimination law do what I thought they should: highlight the multiple avenues through which racial and gender oppression were experienced.
And then he explains that Crenshaw thinks America is a terrible place to live.
To Crenshaw, America is a terrible place full of victim groups, each with their particular set of grievances. Why shouldn't these victim groups get together and form a political coalition unified by the belief that the majority society has harmed them?
So the vibe that I would carry away from this is that Crenshaw manufactured outrage by fictionalizing social tensions in American society to try to get people to conform to her worldview, so she's not a patriot? Here's the thing. Crenshaw has never said, as far as I can find, anything about America being a terrible place to live. Maybe this is just a PragerU style interpretation, but they aren't quoting her here, and this isn't even paraphrasing anything she's said in the op-ed that they're citing or the original essay that Crenshaw wrote. Secondly, there's that little ellipses that you just can't quite ignore. Well, if you actually read this article, Crenshaw elaborates to explain that intersectionality was her way of making these social issues easier to understand. That kind of changes the context here, doesn't it? Instead of suggesting that she made up her theory and that social strata don't actually exert any pressure on marginalized people, she's saying that these are really complicated topics. So this quote was not appropriately implemented in this video. That's not how you paraphrase. You don't just take a thing and I'm wondering what it was about the original essay that wasn't serving its purpose for PragerU. I don't think that this quote was more effective at communicating PragerU's point concisely, nor do I think that it was more relevant to the thing that they were trying to say. I think they chose this article because it was easier to snipe quotes from since it was an op-ed. A different cool kid would call them shit and then just move on, but in my opinion, the worst thing a person can do is know better and still do the crappy thing anyway. It speaks to the pathology of assholes. Instantly. Okay, this is the steamy one. Ben Shapiro says that lesbians push back against settler colonialism in Palestine even though Islamists throw gay people off of bridges.
This explains why at a rally protesting the treatment of Palestinians by Israel, you might see a contingent of lesbian activists. That's intersectionality at work. They're so united by their victim status that it doesn't matter if Islamists throw gays off of buildings or murder female family members who defy their father's wish.
Okay, oh my god. In the West Bank, gay relationships were decriminalized under the rule of Jordan in 1951. Jordan is a majority Muslim country. Meanwhile, in the 1930s in the Gaza Strip, gay relationships were made illegal while the Gaza Strip was under the rule of the British Empire. What the fuck is this about? Why do you guys want to just trash talk Muslim people so bad? You clearly just want to talk about how much you hate Muslim people, so just fucking... The last major factual problem here is the way they define intersectionality. Oh!
Intersectionality is a form of identity politics in which the value of your opinion depends on how many victim groups you belong to. At the bottom of the totem pole is the person everybody loves to hate, the straight white male. And who's at the top? Well, it's very hard to say because new groups claim victim status all the time. No one can keep track.
That was wrong. Of course, it was totally fucking wrong. It was wrong. It was wrong. Let's talk about the history of the term for a second. Kimberle Crenshaw's goal with her essay was to highlight that a lot of feminist and anti-racist activism was very limited in its scope. Her paper's actually analyzing court cases where black women were filing for discrimination lawsuits. Even though there was clearly wrongdoing, the courts were able to argue that there wasn't any racism or sexism because black men and white women weren't experiencing the same thing that black women were experiencing. Rigid ideas about what oppression looks like were limiting our ability to correct injustices. Black women were experiencing a kind of racism-sexism blend, and the feminist movement was supposed to be finding a universal solution to patriarchy or something. And you just can't do that if you're basing all of your goals off of the needs of a very specific group of people. Oppression under patriarchy isn't always going to look like the life of a white middle-class woman. Now, rather than insinuate that white men are evil or something, Crenshaw actually said it would benefit people with privilege to work together with people who don't have as much privilege. How could that be? Thanks for asking, Bradley. Well, it turns out that we all have a shared enemy, and that enemy is frickin' hierarchy, bro. We're all subject to it, and some of us experience that more acutely than others. Power tends to manifest in different ways among different groups of people, and it's way easier to understand that if you're looking at the problem holistically. So to quote the same article by Crenshaw that PragerU cherry-picked from, intersectionality is an analytic sensibility, a way of thinking about identity and its relationship to power. It's a big picture theoretical approach that helps us understand the individual and their relationship to the systems that surround them. It's useful for bridging the gap between people who would seemingly have competing interests but actually have a shared goal. Even the straight white mane! There's a really helpful word, kyriarchy, that made this whole thing a lot more understandable for me. It was coined by a different feminist, Elizabeth Schussler Fiorenza. I apologize to everybody who has a name. She was writing on theology or something in the 90s. I'll link her book below. Kyriarchy is a word to describe systems that are built around subordination, and you can use it as a shorthand. A capitalist patriarchy is a kyriarchy. It's specifically a system of domination organized around class and gender. It's kind of like those ecological diagrams that have like the organism and the community and then the ecosystem. I'll put a diagram here. So there's the specific, the smaller piece, and then the wider puzzle that the piece fits into. And actually, we have one of those for feminism! See, the individual is like the organism, and then like the habitat is like society, and then the ecosystem is like the systems. It's like the systems are like the ecosystem. I have like a gnome in my oh my god! Basically, an intersectional approach helps us highlight trends and relationships in a hierarchical system and to figure out where the individual stands within it so we can better predict how they're affected by those systems. I also have a textbook. It is an Introduction to Women's Studies, that book that was $70, and it is Pearson, so you can know who I hate now. These people define intersectionality as the study of interconnections between different systems, social processes, and representations of discrimination and oppression. Do you see how easy this should be? If you have millions of subscribers and you've had a fucking billionaire backing your squad, how many hours I have to work to pay for something that's $70? So I did all of your homework for you after the due date, you fuckers. You people who like Rogue Warrior, you can pick any of them and you can retry. You can buy my textbook off me. I'll sell it to you for $40 Canadian. That's a lot less than what you probably would pay in America. So to tangentially bring everything together, it's a side note. It's on a side note. Now bear with me. I know that male feminists have been known to eat borders, and I also know that sometimes borders are built out of pronouns. However, isn't it beautiful that some dude, some chick, and the person with a sign can come together despite their disagreements and have civil discourse? Perhaps you don't think that any of this so far has misrepresented intersectional feminists' ideas. So imagine if I made a video like this and I started off by saying that conservatives are curdled milk and they try to make as much money as they can while being as wrong as they can and still extolling their rightness, and then I didn't give you an example of a single conservative who did that. That would be amateur, to say the least, and if that's not acceptable, why is this video serviceable in any way? So there are two common misconceptions about intersectionality in this video. They're not strictly a feature of Prager poopers. One is oppression ranking, and the other is the assumption that intersectional feminists are trying to erase individual responsibility. Most intersectional feminists, in my opinion, wouldn't do what Ben Shapiro does here and try to make a totem pole deciding who's the worst off. I've actually only ever seen anti-feminists try to do this, and I think it's because when you're hearing about intersectionality for the first time from somebody who already doesn't like it, the only thing you can pick up is this thing where you list off characteristics or traits or labels. If you ignore all possible nuance and everything else the intersectional feminists are saying, we just stand in rooms and list off things about ourselves to each other. That's all we do. So there's this other contradictory assumption that feminists are guilty of erasing individuals' experiences while also attempting to eradicate individuals' responsibility for their actions. Intersectionality just helps us understand why people make the choices that they make. So PragerU was initially funded by billionaires who made their fortune off of fracking, and the goal of the channel was to pull youths away from progressivism. These videos aren't meant to spark your curiosity or to encourage you to look into things yourselves and learn how to be autodidactic. They're supposed to tell you what to think about something. But the feminists are bashing back. Toilet paper out of the way, because my hips are hurting. You'll notice that false or biased representations of feminism tend to be coupled with other big problems, like, for instance, distorted or outright false claims, ignorance, or beliefs that fall apart under scrutiny. I don't want you to walk away from this video thinking the point is to destroy people and pat ourselves on the back for how smart we are. We have to remember that if somebody is willing to accept one obviously wrong thing, then they're very apt to accept another, especially if their beliefs are formed through reactionarism. You oppose feminism because it's bad, then somebody leads you to associate, climate science with feminism, and you end up opposing green energy too. I don't just say that based on these videos that I've made either. Don't tell anyone, but I haven't always been an anarcho-feminazi myself. When I was in high school, I discovered YouTube videos by reactionaries that introduced me to feminism with very unflattering reviews. I started to feel very, very angry. I would vocalize hatred for feminism and feminists frequently just based on these kinds of videos. What ended up changing my mind was on a whim I decided to go out and actually see what feminists were saying as they said it. I realized that, holy shit, I didn't know anything about any of them, and in fact I'd been lied to about what some of them actually believed. This was all before the brainwashing at university, where my professors indoctrinated me with statements like, you should always question your politics, Manchurian candidate number 1 over here, that's me, take me to LensCrafters. When I think of the people who are watching PragerU videos, or any of the ones that I've talked about on this channel, I can only imagine the 16-year-old me, who had no idea what any of these words really meant, and who really just needed somebody to patiently talk with her. I get that to some people, partaking in this stuff is like frying very small fish, especially in light of the plague. Unfortunately, Banasic exercises like reviewing the definition of intersectionality are important on the internet. Even though these arguments are tired and they've been discredited by experts and randos like a billion times since the beginning of time, we gotta say something every now and then. So that's done, thankfully. So my next video is up for a vote. It's either gonna be about why the dictionary is for gnomes, 2 things I like about blasphemous, or the real villain of the film Ex Machina, and you can vote in the comments. If you vote wrong, you'll be in the draw. It's not real. It's real. It's not. Wash your hands.
Do you ever feel like people only like you because they don't know enough about you yet?